Okay, here's a thought to kick us off. What if the key to fighting something like cancer, something so tough, isn't, harsh treatments, but something really unexpected, like fat? Today, on the deep dive, that's exactly what we're digging into. We're exploring how our own bodies, specifically our metabolism, and yeah, special kind of fat might be harnessed to, well, starve cancer. This is going to take us back, way back, but also right up to the cutting edge, like stuff published just last year.
It really is a fascinating scientific journey. We're tracing how we understood cancer and metabolism from some pretty old misconceptions right through to these modern breakthroughs. And it really underscores how important critical thinking is,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with complex health stuff. You have to question things.
Definitely. So let's start maybe with how we even saw cancer historically. It's always been this thing that eats you from the inside, right? Sources describe cancer cells as deranged cells with deranged mitochondria, which basically means their energy factories are broken.
That's right, fundamentally broken. And that forces them into this really inefficient, almost desperate reliance on one specific fuel, glucose.
They're called unhinged, unbridled, insatiable hunger for sugar. And this idea, this focus on cancer's hunger, it goes way back. I mean, get this, in the 1600s, physicians were literally putting raw meat on tumors, hoping the cancer would, go for the steak instead of the patient.
Wow, that's quite a picture. Morbid, really.
Totally. Or think about old wives' tales, maybe not totally tales, as we'll find out, about fasting to fight disease.
And what's cool is how those early sort of observations eventually got some scientific backing. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and you have the German physiologist Otto Warburg. He made this huge discovery. We now call it the Warburg effect. He found cancer cells are incredibly bad at getting energy from glucose.
How bad are we talking?
Well, think about ATP. That's our body's energy money. A healthy cell. It gets about 38 ATP from one glucose molecule. A cancer cell, because its mitochondria are messed up, it only gets 2.
Just 2. That's a massive difference.
Exactly. So because they're so inefficient, they have to just guzzle glucose like crazy to survive. Warburg measured tumors consuming something like 70 milligrams of glucose compared to maybe 16 milligrams for normal tissue.
Wow, like 4 times as much.
Yeah, huge appetite. And Warburg's theory, which was pretty radical then but still holds up, was that this broken energy system, this mitochondrial dysfunction, wasn't just a symptom. He thought it was the cause of the uncontrolled growth.
And that directly connects to PET scans, right?
Precisely. PET imaging uses radioactive glucose. You inject it, and it lights up wherever glucose is being used fastest. So those bright spots on a scan. That's literally showing you cancer's desperate hunger. Though, quick caveat, you often hear these high glucose usage numbers for the brain and heart, but that's usually in people eating carbs. If you're low carb, the brain uses less glucose, and the heart actually prefers fatty acids anyway.
Okay, so cancer cells are glucose addicts because their energy systems are broken. The logical next thought then is, well, can't we just cut off their supply, starve them with diet? This idea really caught on, especially for people looking outside mainstream medicine. It makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
It really does. The appeal is obvious, but it's trickier than it sounds. The body is incredibly adaptable, and that's the challenge here. The big problem is, even if you cut dietary glucose way down, your body can just start making its own. It's called gluconeogenesis, making new glucose, often from protein.
Why would it do that if it's feeding the cancer?
Because, unfortunately, the body still sees those cancer cells as part of you. Even though they're deranged, they're still your cells. So the body tries to keep them fed.
Ah, okay. So your own body kind of works against the starvation plan.
Yeah.
That's a crucial point. And knowing that, okay, various diets still popped up. There was the ketogenic diet, which got rediscovered, right? Not new, but brought back. The idea was lower blood sugar, starve the tumors.
Lower glucose, lower insulin.
Then you had things like the Budwig diet, that flaxseed oil and cottage cheese mix, claiming to fix fat metabolism, and the alkaline diet, trying to neutralize the tumor's acidic environment. And sadly, you also got outright fraud, like that whole Bell Gibson thing, people making false claims.
Yeah, and this is where we really need to look hard at the science. For keto, the clinical trials just haven't consistently shown major tumor shrinkage or survival benefits. Now, you could argue about the studies, how they were run, who was in them, how long they lasted. Nutritional science is tough. But here's a contradiction that pops up later. We'll talk about brown fat and how it seems to work by grabbing glucose. So if that works, why don't keto or just low-carb diets consistently show that same powerful effect?
Question.
The thinking now is shifting. Maybe it's not just about removing glucose, but about the hormones, specifically low insulin. Low insulin, which you get with low carb, can actually brown your regular white fat, turn it into an energy burner, so it becomes an internal competitor for the cancer's fuel. It's a bit more subtle than just starvation.
Okay, so it's activating something within you, not just taking something away. That's interesting.
Exactly. Now, the Budwig diet. Despite the buzz, no real scientific study ever proved it affected cancer outcomes. It's hard to prove cause and effect in nutrition sometimes. And the alkaline diet. That was based on a misunderstanding. Tumors are acidic because of their metabolism, not the other way around. And your body keeps your pH incredibly stable anyway. Diet doesn't really change it overall.
So basically, a lot of these miracle diets didn't hold up.
Pretty much. Cancer is, as one source put it, exceptionally good at finding what it needs. It can even trigger new blood vessels to grow angiogenesis to make sure it gets fed, which leads to that harsh reality. Trying a whole-body starvation approach often means, well, you starve before the cancer does.
Right. So if trying to starve the whole body didn't quite pan out, where did science look next? This leads to a really interesting twist involving metformin. That's a common diabetes drug, right? Used to lower blood sugar.
Yes, exactly. And researchers noticed something odd. People taking metformin seem to have a significantly lower chance of getting cancer in the first place, maybe 30 to 50% lower.
Wow. How does metformin work?
It inhibits a part of the mitochondria's energy-making machinery called complex I. This helps pull glucose out of the blood. But here's the catch. While it seemed to lower cancer risk, if someone already had established cancer, metformin didn't really improve survival rates. It wasn't enough to stop a tumor already growing strong.
Okay, so it hinted at the glucose connection but wasn't the full answer.
Right. It made researchers think, okay, whole-body starvation is tough, metformin isn't enough once cancer's there. What if we could somehow steal the fuel right at the tumor's doorstep, intercept it just before the cancer cells grab it?
And this is where things get really unexpected. 2002. Radiologists are looking at routine PET scans. They keep seeing this strong signal lighting up around the neck and spine in adults, and weirdly, it got stronger when people were cold.
Yeah, initially they thought maybe it was muscle tensing from the cold, but nope. It turned out to be brown adipose tissue, brown fat.
Brown fat? I thought that was mainly for babies.
That was the common thinking. White fat just stores energy, right? But brown fat is different. It's packed with special mitochondria that can burn fuel to generate heat directly. That's non-shivering thermogenesis.
Yeah.
Super important for newborns who can't shiver well. The scientific idea was that it mostly disappeared as we grew up. But these PET scans challenged that. Maybe it stuck around, but we didn't notice because, well, maybe our carb-heavy diets or warm houses kept it inactive.
Okay, so adults have this heat-generating fat. What did researchers do with that info?
Well, scientists at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden did this really elegant mouse experiment. They put tumors in mice, then they split them. One group lived in a comfy 30 degrees Celsius, nice and warm.
Right.
The other group, they lived at a chilly 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make their bodies work to stay warm, but not so cold they were constantly shivering.
And what happened?
The results were pretty stunning. In the warm mice, the tumors sucked up glucose like you'd expect. But in the cold mice, their brown fat activated. It went into overdrive, burning fuel for heat. And by doing that, it aggressively competed with the tumor for glucose, the outcome. An 80% inhibition of tumor growth, and the cold mice lived twice as long.
80%, just from being cold. That's incredible.
It really is, and it makes us go back to that keto question, right? If brown fat works by grabbing glucose, why didn't simple carb restriction work as dramatically?
Yeah, what's the thinking there?
It might be about the mechanism. Maybe it's less about the total glucose available everywhere and more about that low insulin environment we talked about. Low insulin doesn't just happen with cold, it happens with low carb too. And low insulin itself helps brown the white fat, activating its energy-burning machinery, UCP1. So maybe the diet and the cold work partly by activating this internal competitor, not just removing the fuel source. It's interconnected.
So it's like turning on your body's own furnace to compete with the cancer.
Kind of, yeah. And this wasn't just mice. There was a small human study in 2021, just one patient with Hodgkin's lymphoma, but still very interesting.
They put the patient in mild cold, about 16 Celsius, for a few days.
And the PT scan showed, yes, the brown fat activated, but more importantly, glucose uptake in the tumor sites noticeably decreased.
Wow. So direct evidence in a person.
Exactly. Now, it wasn't a cure, just one person, one study. But it was proof of principle. Activated brown fat could outcompete cancer for glucose in the human body.
But then you hit the practical wall, right? Who wants to live in a fridge for months while fighting cancer and also avoiding all sugar?
Precisely. It's
Okay.
not ideal. The logistics are tough, especially for someone already weak.
Which leads us to the really futuristic part. Scientists at UCSF asked, okay, can we get the benefit of brown fat's hunger without the freezing cold? Their work was published in Nature Biotechnology.
Yeah, this is really cutting-edge stuff. They used CRISPR, the gene editing tool, to basically tweak regular white fat cells. They engineered them to act more like brown fat, creating what they call beige fat. The key was activating a gene called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1.
UCP1, that's the one you say gets turned on by low insulin and cold.
That's the one. It's the gene that lets brown fat burn fuel for heat instead of storing energy. It uncouples fuel burning from energy storage. That's its superpower.
Okay, so they made beige fat in the lab. What happened when they put it near cancer cells?
The results were, frankly, astonishing. In the dish, when they put these engineered beige fat cells with cancer cells, the cancer cells basically got wiped out. Almost none remained. The beige fat cells thrived, just consuming all the available fuel. They did it again and again, same result. Then they took it to a living system. They made tiny clumps of this engineered fat organoids and implanted them right next to tumors in mice. And in just 3 weeks, across aggressive types breast, pancreatic, colon, prostate cancer, the tumors next to the beige fat shrank by more than 50%.
50% in 3 weeks, with no chemo, no radiation.
None. Just by implanting fat cells that were better at eating glucose.
That is potentially revolutionary. A living cell therapy.
It really is. And fat cells have advantages for this. Easy to get via liposuction, grow well in the lab, you can edit them precisely with CRISPR, easy to put back in, and they usually don't cause big immune reactions.
Could the cancer adapt, like grow more blood vessels or switch to eating fat?
Good questions. Angiogenesis is always a possibility cancer tries. But switching to fat? Unlikely. Remember that fundamental mitochondrial dysfunction, the Warburg effect. It means cancer cells are terrible at burning fat efficiently. They're really stuck needing glucose, or maybe glutamine.
So this engineered fat really hits their weak spot.
It seems to.
Yeah.
But it also points towards maybe a more, let's say, holistic or natural approach too. If low insulin and cold activate UCP1 and brown the fat naturally, maybe consistent very low-carb eating combined with cold therapy, cold showers, ice baths could mimic this effect. Lower insulin, activate UCP1, make your own fat compete with potential cancer cells.
Interesting. So harnessing the same biology, just without the genetic engineering.
Potentially, yes. Activating your body's innate metabolic machinery.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just amazing looking back from, doctors putting meat on tumors to Warburg figuring out the broken metabolism, the ups and downs of diet trials, and now engineered fat cells eating cancer's lunch.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway for you?
For me, it really hammers home that science builds on itself,
Sure.
standing on the shoulders of giants, like they say. Each discovery, even the ones that didn't pan out fully, added a piece to the puzzle. And it leaves us with this really powerful thought, doesn't it? Our bodies have these incredible metabolic tools built in. What does this tell us about our own power to influence our health?
Yeah, how can we maybe use this knowledge day to day?
Exactly. How can we support our metabolic health proactively? Maybe even help our bodies deter disease before it starts. It definitely raises more questions, I think, for all of us about how deeply connected metabolism and overall health really are. What new questions does it spark for you?